Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for coming. And thank you all for your well wishes last week. The funny story behind the event that caused me to have to cancel last week wasn't so funny then, but I've since developed a sense of humor about it and a caution for sunblock that I didn't understand how much that would hurt if you got it in your eye. And my eye was weeping and weeping, and then it was all swollen. And I looked like the creature from the Black Lagoon. So I decided I needed to rest the eye, and I knew you'd understand. So today, what we're going to move forward with is finishing up the section of a number of podcasts dealing with setting and maintaining boundaries and limits. And we are going to start with a short review because we have new people here today, and I want everyone, the regulars and the new people, to understand what we're talking about. So basically, what are boundaries and limits? What are the different types of boundaries and limits? And finally, it's all nice to have that information in your head, but how do we actually develop and maintain our own personal boundaries and limits? Because we've talked about this before. They are the foundation blocks for the development and maintenance of our self-esteem, right? We can't do our best. Sometimes we can't do all that well if we are walking around with injured and damaged self-esteem, right? The degree to which we can believe in ourselves and stand with and by ourselves when we're not functioning at our best, all right, is a right of ours. And if we haven't learned to do that, we really believe, like we heard in the book Procrastination by Jane Burka and Lenora Ewan, that many people, when they get stuck in procrastination, which is part of boundaries and limits, they equate their worth, their self-worth, the rights they have to anything, success, happiness, a reasonable life, their fair share of the good stuff in life. Their right to that depends upon how highly functioning and what they produce. We can't produce our best or anything akin to it if we allow things to rob us of our self-esteem. Okay, so here are some definitions, and I'm going to include more than one because in the literature I read to put together today's material, there were little versions that I thought were interesting, and probably some pertain more to some people, and the expanded definitions might refer to you. So boundaries basically are guidelines, all right? They're rules or they're limits that each of us as individuals creates to define our identity, who we are, where our limits are, what we will tolerate, and what we will not tolerate. Now, we can still not tolerate something by punishing ourselves, by shutting down, all right? We can set that limit and reinforce it by drawing the limit and communicating that with others as well. But any way you look at it, if your boundaries and limits are not being respected, then you are paying a price either way. And also, boundaries and limits help us understand how we will respond when somebody steps out of those limits. What do we as unique individuals actually do to communicate and reinforce the boundaries and limits that protect our safe zone, all right? So think of boundaries and limits as what you'll say and who you'll say it to, when you'll say it, about the furthest level they can go behaviorally, usually, the furthest they can go that we can allow, that keep us, not the most we can tolerate, all right? That's gone too far. It's where is that line that we are still feeling safe, heard, and understood. Maybe not agreed with, all right? Disagreement is fair game, but we can stay feeling integral. We can still feel good about ourselves and safe. For example, the kinds of places that and people that people often come away feeling stung or hurt or in some way demeaned or lessened are examples where people behave in a demanding way. They have the right and you don't have the right. And they're making not requests, suggestions, but they're making demands on you, all right? You've just been moved into you don't count zone, all right? Controlling. So it's not that they are dismissing you. They want you active, but they want you to be a mini them, all right, a mini me. And they want to control what you say, how you think, and what you do and what you don't do, usually for their benefit or convenience. Those who just walk through life with a red pencil marking everything gets criticized. It's the first thing they do. They're the people who tell you what's wrong right away. Someone makes an innocent statement or an innocent observation, and here's what's wrong with that. All right, so watch out for those kind of people, because almost involuntarily, you're going to be a target, and it probably isn't going to feel good. It also isn't fair and factual. Those who push you, all right, they hear you, but they want more, or they want less of something you're doing, and they don't hear you. They're not prepared to listen. They're not prepared to compromise. They push you and push you and push you and push you. It's like the water torture, you know, the drop, drop, drop. They obsess on something and you're going to do it, and it may not be all at one time that they're pushing you. It could be they just never let it go, all right? And unfortunately, we do have abusive people in our lives, in our communities, and you can always tell, all right? Sometimes you don't have an injury that is visible, but you always feel this, all right, that pulling back into yourself when somebody is being abusive. Those people who are invasive, they're all very interested, but they have no boundaries and limits, and they put you on the spot requesting information or raising topics that they don't have the relationship with you to be entitled to that information. That is your story to tell. That is yours to decide if and who and when you will share that information with. And they are boundary invaders. Those people who play weak, or vulnerable or hurt, and they plead. Right? So they make you feel guilty. They make you feel like it's the least you could do. It's not going to cost you anything, and it means so much to me, but it really isn't something, all right, that you're comfortable with. And even those who smother you with kindness, all right, they just are, what's the expression? Honey gets more than vinegar. Well, that's true, but there is a limit, and the limit is inside you, all right? I'd like you to consider, until you have developed your own strategy for dealing with this incoming, whether it's demanding, controlling, criticizing, pushing, abusive, invasive, smothering you with kindness, no matter what flavor of invasion it is, I'd like you to consider living by the rule of 3. I live by the rule of 3 and I find it really handy, all right? The first time someone does it, you know what, it was an accident. They didn't understand, so I explain it to them. The second time they do it, clearly I wasn't clear enough, all right? It's either a coincidence, if it's a behavior, or there's something. I take responsibility. I didn't make it clear to you. So here I'm going to repeat it. I'm going to repeat it a lot more simply and with clearer language. The third time it happens, right? It's a pattern and we deal with it. And we deal with it as it is. All right. So that requires a certain level of assertiveness. I gave you that book title on assertiveness, and I hope that many of you have gone to the library and got a copy of it and are starting to work your way through it, okay? So there are different types of boundaries, right? Personal boundaries. Those are determined by the amount of physical and emotional space each and every one of us needs in order to feel comfortable. And that is the safe zone where we can allow behavioral or communication transactions between ourselves and others. Personal boundaries also help us to decide what type of communication. Remember the rule of 3? The first time I have to say it, I'm pleasant and I'm cheery. The second time I have to say it, I'm a little less cheery and I'm a little more concise, okay? I may ask them, is there something about that you don't understand, so that I can clarify you, because I really feel this strongly, all right? They are the boundaries that help you decide on your behavior. Are you going to engage? Are you not going to engage? With whom, when, and to what extent? And what interactions are acceptable? It's okay. If you get the heebie-jeebies or that kind of invaded, feeling internally, you don't need to come up with a list of justifications about, well, okay, is this rational? If you're feeling it, it's you, it's rational. Act on it. For that time, set that boundary. You know, I'm not comfortable. I'm not comfortable with that. I'll think about it. Right. We're going to talk a little later, just a little more about how to express it, because sometimes we feel it, we know it, we believe it, we just don't know how to get it out. We don't know what kind of language to start with. Okay, why are personal boundaries so important? Why? Because they're absolutely fundamental to our mental health, right? You cannot have healthy mental health if you're constantly on the defensive, if you're constantly feeling the, what? No, that didn't feel good. All right, you can see that that is never going to work for you to have healthy mental health. Healthy boundaries and limits, when they're personal, also help us to practice and be able to maintain ourselves in a zone where we can take care of ourselves. We're not on the defensive. We're not focused on the other guy. We're actually able to own our feelings and our opinions. We're open to more information, not like we're rigid, but at this point in time, with what I know and how I feel, this is me, all right? And I can exercise good self-care. They help us also establish and communicate where the lines are with respect to beyond our self-esteem, how we feel good about ourselves, our self-respect. Where did we just go into a zone that is not who we are really and truly, fundamentally, according to our values, beliefs, feelings, and our approach to our own life? Healthy personal boundaries and limits also help us communicate to the other guy what our needs are in relationships and help us stay and help them understand how to be part of being in that inner safe zone with us, all right? Because they respect. They may not agree, they may not like, what we're saying or doing, but they respect the fact that it reflects our position in life about whatever is being discussed. It saves us time, all right? We don't constantly have to get injured or feel threatened or put off or whatever the degree of invasion is, and the need to heal, go back and kind of process. We don't spend our whole life processing what just happened. We can get on with life. We can get on with healthy, more positive exchanges with people and with ourselves. All right. And they also help us understand the need, when and how to recover, all right, personally, when it continues to happen, all right, and you understand that that other person is not consistently respecting where the line is, and they're constantly transgressing, we know then that we may need to deal with them in an even heightened assertive way by moving them out. I like to think of relationships in circles. There's the inner circle, and the inner circle is like here. All right, they are the people that I would hug. They are the people that I would tell the absolute unadulterated factual truth to if they asked. They're the people that I love. They love me. I respect them, not just because they are entitled to respect, but because we have an emotional and intellectual and physical exchange. That's my inner circle. The circle beyond that, just outside of that, are friends. They're people who I know that I really like. We have a lot in common. We may not have history, or we may not have that not immediate, but developed understanding of each other. We get each other, and I would do things with them. I would socialize with them. And then there are the people outside of that. And ring number 2 and ring number 3, that is a permeable barrier, all right? People can move in and out. Now, between those two, depending on whether they do respect my boundaries and limits, and when I'm with them, they respect other people's boundaries and limits too. All right, it isn't just about me. We develop trust by observing what these other individuals' values, their behavior, what they do under stress, what they do and how they behave when they don't get what they want. All right, how honest they are. Now, so physical boundaries pertain to things like your personal space, your right to privacy, all right? Whether that is your mail, your drawers, your mind, that you don't have to share everything. Everything that is true does not need to be said necessarily. It's up to you. They ask you a question and you have the right to say, you know, I don't think I'm really ready to answer that at this time. I'm still thinking about that. So, all right. And also the right to self-determination about your own body, right? How close can they stand? Can they put their arm around you? Can they put a hand on your shoulder? Would you shake hands with them? All right. All right. So when we're expressing it's important that the message we give respects the boundary and limit. It reflects it and respects it, right? We can't be saying one thing and doing another, all right? That's a mixed message. We're asking for trouble. We really need to think through, all right? So we express our personal boundaries and limits through the clothing we wear, how much of our body is covered or not, how tight we wear things, what we wear, all right? The shelter we seek. So do you seek shelter when you need to be understood, when you feel a threat or you're in pain? Are you the kind of person who reaches out to other people? That's shelter, okay? It isn't just your home. Or are you the kind of individual that wants to sit back and kind of just be quiet and alone with yourself and catch your breath before you share whatever you might choose or not choose? You have the right to do that. All right, you don't have to please the other individual. Oh, they want you to come and seek shelter with them. You have the right to be yourself and to be understood and respected for it, okay? Something as simple as our tolerance of noise, all right, that we can function with. Some people want you're sharing an office. Some people want the radio on. They want 3 radios on because they want to be informed. They speak loudly. They're active, noisy individuals. It doesn't have to say anything bad about them, but it might be a good idea to find another space to work or to learn to negotiate, or, I can't think. I'm more easily distracted and I can't think when there's so much going on, or people who like to work and talk and chat. If you're not that person, all right, you're entitled to explain that doesn't work for you, and to negotiate times to have those exchanges if you're open to them, okay? The manner that you get a verbal instruction from, if it's a boss, or that you give verbal instruction, so that it doesn't sound like you've got a commanding officer giving you orders, all right? Some people, that would really rub the wrong way. That would feel like punishment. Other people, they have a different threshold. They have a different tolerance. Can you see how these things I'm talking about are individual to you? Also, our own body language and our interpretation of other people's body language is also a physical boundary. So our own body language, we can't very reasonably suggest that nobody's allowed to hug us or touch us if our first response is to touch or hug somebody else, whether they want it or not. It's always good to ask, are you open to a hug? Or, some people have a shortcut. I'm a hugger. What do you think? And sometimes they get yes, and sometimes they get, I'm not so touchy. I'm not such a hugger. And that's okay. It's not a personal rejection. Okay, so next set of boundaries, next type of boundaries, material boundaries. These are a little simpler. Okay, material boundaries determine whether you give or lend, trade things such as money, your car, clothing, books, food, anything else that is tangibly yours to be responsible for, all right? Mental boundaries. Mental boundaries are quite often physically transgressed. Mental boundaries apply to your thoughts, your values, okay, and your opinions. Are you easily suggestible? Do you know what you believe? Remember, I've asked you a number of times, what are your needs? And so many of our needs are based on our values and what we believe is right and what we believe is good. Can you hold on to your opinions? If you can't, now I'm not talking about being rigid and not open to more and better information. We should all do that because we are growing, learning, developing human beings, and situations change. High quality information And the constant flow of it either reinforces what we believe or challenges what we believe. Let's be growing, learning, developing human beings. However, when you have an opinion and you aren't receiving better and more information, how well do you give up that and agree and say, oh yeah, no, I understand. Yeah. If you can do that just to be agreeable, not agree that you're wrong and they're right, but just as a social skill, that's okay. You don't have to get into loggerheads on opinions and values. It's okay to say on values, yeah, I don't share that. I don't share that view of the world. My view, and if you want to offer it, my view of the world is more this. Okay? One of my views of the world is, why wouldn't you help somebody if you could? Right? If it's not costing you your life or something that you owe somebody else or you owe yourself, why wouldn't you do that? All right. What are yours? Can you listen with an open mind to somebody else's opinion? Or are you immediately shutting down and going, yeah, no, you're wrong. Inside your head, no, you're wrong. No, you're wrong. Here's how you're wrong. No, that's not. No. And you're replaying your opinions and your values. Can you just go on pause and listen? Listen to the end of the conversation, right? And open your mind to somebody else's opinion without becoming either passively or actively rigid and defensive. You don't have to protect anything. You don't have to justify what you think, what you believe, and what you feel. It's okay to open your mind and say, oh, I can see how he or she would get to that opinion or feel that way. I don't share it, but yeah, I can see that could happen. If you become highly emotional, even passively, right, or argumentative, you have to win it, because if you don't win it, somehow they're right. Doesn't change anything. The more you argue, the more you defend your position, it doesn't change the right and wrongness of it. All right? And there are so few things that it matters whether we are right or wrong. Let it go. If you believe it's right to say and do something that does not hurt, offend, or cost somebody else their right to their personal territory, then you're right. And they can be right too. Maybe there's more than one truth. Maybe truth depends on consequence, on context rather. Another kind of boundaries, emotional boundaries. We're all aware of these, all right? Emotional boundaries distinguish separating your emotions and responsibility for them from somebody else's. It's either good news or it's bad news, folks, all right? We are all responsible for knowing our needs, our wants, our desires, our opinions, our values, and nobody else is responsible for knowing them or helping us achieve them. We are responsible for achieving our own, meeting our own needs. It's nice when we have supporters. It's nice, but fundamentally, okay, we are the only people who can truly know what our needs are, what our boundaries and limits are, and we are responsible for making those things happen. Nobody else, not your spouse, not your mother, not your father, not your sister, not your brother, not your best friend, not your boss, not your children, not your pets. We need to take personal responsibility for that. So emotional boundaries are a little bit like a force field, okay, that separates us from others. It's your kinesthetic zone. Healthy boundaries prevent you from doing the following. Emotional boundaries prevent you from doing the following: giving advice. All right? Sharing experience that you've had is not giving advice. So long as you are not giving it to the other person in a way that is, I had this experience, this is the right way it worked for me. Okay. One of the things when I want to suggest something to someone, say, is, for whatever benefit this can do you, if it can. I had this experience, this worked, this didn't. If that in some way saves you something or helps you in some way, that's great. It also prevents you from blaming. When you take and you assume, you reinforce your personal responsibility for your own beliefs, feelings, and behaviors. You can't blame anybody else, all right? They behaved in a certain way. They're not responsible for your reaction. That's the bad news. They're not, all right? You are responsible. I am responsible for the way I respond. It's not that those two events aren't linked, but that's part of taking personal responsibility. It also helps you prevent yourself from accepting blame, all right, for what somebody else did. You are not necessarily, this is not cast in stone. You are not necessarily responsible for the outcome, all right? Emotional boundaries protect you from feeling guilty for someone else's negative feelings. So when they react in a certain way, all right, even though what you gave them may not have been good news, you are not responsible. It's really hard sometimes to get your head around that, but it's true. You are not responsible for their feelings or the problems they have, all right, or for taking others' comments personally. They may intend it personally. I'm not saying they're not. I've heard comments that it would be very hard to understand it any other way. However, you have the ability to develop the skill, right, not to take it personally. It defines who they are, what they are. The worst name doesn't touch you because it came out of their mouth. You can't project on someone else something that is not true of you. So check the source the next time you feel someone has said something personally. Don't accept it. Hand it back and look at them. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to elevate the discussion or the conflict. All right? You look at them and think, well, that's something I didn't know about you, but it came out of your mouth. That's true of you, because I know it's not true of me. And you don't have to say a word. Turn and walk away. It also, if you are constantly, all right, in a high reactivity state, that you're easily triggered, you're easily put on the defensive, you're easily hurt, all that means, all right, is that it suggests that you might have really weak, all right, sense of emotional boundaries. Time for some practice, time for some support, some help, and time for some really honest self-talk. Maybe time to get that book and have a read. And there's lots of good information on the internet if you can't afford a book, okay, or you don't have any more room to store a book. Healthy emotional boundaries also require clear internal boundaries. Okay, you need to internally be pretty clear about what feels good and what doesn't feel good, and even basically just your right to feel that way, right? Without blaming anybody else, without taking it out on anybody else. And then the emotional boundaries, what you do about it, how you express it emotionally, how you let it become a voice on the committee, in that committee meeting we all periodically have going on in our head. To know your feelings and your responsibility to yourself and others. Okay, that has to be clear. You are responsible for protecting yourself. Sexual boundaries. Sexual boundaries protect your comfort level with sexual touch and sexual activity. What type of activity you're open to, where this activity is engaged in, with whom. Do you choose to engage in sexual activity? Do you not? Just because you have one time doesn't mean you're obliged any other time, okay? You are not in every moment of your life the same person. This is not, none of these feelings, none of this awareness is like a legal precedent, all right? You are allowed to feel differently today. Now, if you go polar, change frequently, let me know. That's a different discussion. But every day things don't feel, seem, and appear, all right, exactly the same. Okay? Spiritual boundaries, okay, our life force. Spiritual boundaries relate to your beliefs and your experiences in connection with your God, a higher power, the universe, by whatever identity you apply to something greater, bigger than you are, all right? You have boundaries there as well. They indicate that, what does indicate codependence, okay, is that making boundaries becomes harder. Things like consistently putting other people's needs and feelings first, regardless of the context. It could be your worst day and somebody calls and you don't have the steam in the tank, and you can't say, I'd like to be able to support you today, but I'm not having the best day myself. Can we talk about this another time? I'd like to go and just kind of rest. Do you ever do that? Okay, not knowing oneself and what one's own needs and limits are. Not knowing, codependence is feeling that you don't have the right to have or set and reinforce the boundaries we described above. Codependence is the belief that setting boundaries and maintaining them actually jeopardizes a relationship. If you set limits, somehow you're putting that relationship in jeopardy. You're actually solidifying it. You're keeping that relationship on solid ground. All right? Codependence versus maintaining and protecting the integrity of each person, which is actually what happens when you set and enforce and maintain your own personal boundaries and limits. All right? You give that person the opportunity to understand you much better, to be able to predict, with her, with him, that doesn't go over that well. So I want to be with that person. I want to spend time. I want to enjoy their company or a relationship with them. And so I know I'm going to stay in this zone. I'm going to stay away from the owies unless he or she raises it and says they'd like to discuss it. Okay? Codependence can also come from not knowing what the target is. You don't know what emotional, physical, spiritual, sexual, material boundaries look and feel like, right? Codependence can come from that as well when you're working in the dark because you've never learned healthy boundaries growing up. Or there were boundaries, but somebody else had the right and you didn't. Okay? Internal boundaries are one more type I want to talk to you about. They involve regulating your own relationship with yourself. Think of these kinds of boundaries as self-discipline through healthy management of time, thoughts, what you allow to distract you, how you develop skills and you practice those skills to refocus even though you become distracted. Okay? How you deal with your emotions, how you respect them, how you express them, how you may keep them to yourself until you're comfortable and you have things sorted out well enough that you're clearer. Just because you feel something doesn't mean you have to dump it and share it. Right? Do you know that? Even if somebody's requesting it, even if somebody's couching that somehow this is the way we build intimacy. No, we do not build intimacy by leaving ourselves in an exposed zone until we've developed and we're confident there is sufficient trust. Trust is not given. Trust is earned by observance of how that person reacts to you and to others in a variety of situations. How we manage and take responsibility and set boundaries for our moods, for our behavior, and also especially for those people who create hoarded environments, okay? For our impulses. How do we set self-discipline? How do we practice it? How do we learn it? How do we reinforce it? Especially for our impulses. Impulses, act in haste, repent at leisure is the motto for impulses. All right? It doesn't hurt to put yourself on pause, take a deep breath, and have a look at what you're dealing with and decide, is this a good idea or does it just feel like a good idea right now? All right? Will I regret this tomorrow? Will I regret this when the credit card bill comes in? If you're procrastinating doing things that you neither want to do nor have to do necessarily, or that you're overdoing them and not getting enough rest and recuperation, that also is a boundary. All or nothing. All or nothing is not the way out of anything. It prevents you also codependence, all right? So going from one extreme to the other is an indicator of codependence. It also robs you of the joy, your own personal joy that is there for you for your life. It robs you of the opportunity to do things other than worry and blame yourself for not doing anything. You may be neglecting internal physical boundaries. Are you learning to manage negative thoughts and feelings? Because learning to do that supports you while you learn these goals, these commitments, these strategies to set healthy boundaries and limits. Healthy emotional, mental, internal boundaries help you to assume responsibility for and not obsess about other people's feelings and problems or the problems you might create. You're not responsible for creating problems. A problem cannot be created by somebody else, and you are responsible for that. They make a choice. You can influence it. You can influence it, but you're not the cause. If they pick the ball up and run with it, you're not responsible for that. You did influence. You have a part to play, but you are not 100% responsible for that. Strong internal boundaries, right, also help you curb suggestibility. I didn't have that idea, but now I can't get it out of my mind. It's like that song, all right, that plays through your head every day, okay? So I want to move forward here. Guilt, resentment, and anger are often a signal that personal action with respect to setting, reinforcing, and maintaining healthy boundaries and limits, any one of the type we've talked about, is required. If you feel resentful or victimized and are blaming someone or something, it might mean that you haven't taken your responsibility for knowing, setting, and enforcing boundaries and limits. You're not giving people the information they need not to put a foot wrong, not to make you anxious and guilty, all right? If you feel anxious and guilty about setting boundaries, remember, your relationship with others as well as yourself is impacted, and it isn't impacted positively, all right? All right, because it's so important for us to do this, to know what our healthy boundaries and limits are, and to set them, to enforce them when necessary, to manage them, because we teach people how to treat us. We teach them how to treat us by the boundaries and limits we set and maintain. All right. Okay. What are your boundaries and limits? So, here are some guidelines for setting healthy boundaries and limits. First of all, there's a bit of an art to doing it. A little bit of increased self-assertiveness would be very handy. Don't do it in anger, okay? Don't do it in response to anger or by nagging. The other person's ability to listen just turned off. You won't be heard. Boundaries and limits are not meant to be a punishment. They're intended to keep everybody in the well-being and protected zone. They're more effective when you're assertive, when you speak calmly, firmly, courteously, and simply from the heart. All right? If that doesn't work, sometimes it doesn't, you may need to communicate consequences to encourage cooperation. Because after all, these limits are your limit. All right? You're not bluffing. This is not a, gee, this is a Christmas present, wouldn't it be great? This really, truly is your safe zone. You're happy, contented, I'm okay. I'm feeling good about myself and I'm feeling good about you. Even when I've made a mistake, okay? I choose the growth mindset. What have I learned from this? To do or not do, not the fixed mindset. What a failure, I feel so terrible about myself, I feel so guilty. Back to that procrastination book, okay? If that just resonated with you, you're looking at growth mindset versus fixed mindset. That's the chapter, all right? However, it's essential, however, that you never threaten a consequence. When you're being pushed, when you're not being listened to, you're not being respected, don't bluff. All right, do not bluff. Do not say something that you know you're not ready to enforce, because when you do that, that's called bluffing. When you do that, if your bluff is called, you have just lost all credibility. All right, and you're back to square one. You can and by doing that, another important thing to remember is you can actually train people to push you farther than your healthy boundary and limit. In fact, you're teaching them to do that if in the end you give in. It's okay. It's okay to get up and say, clearly we're not listening to one another. We can try this another time, but right now I've had enough. I'm at my limit. Okay, and so I don't want hard feelings. I don't want us to fight about this. This is the way it is for me, and we can come back when we're both able to listen to each other better. Okay? So how do we set healthy boundaries and limits? First of all, we get support about learning to be able to set healthy boundaries and limits. We start practicing today, please, today, in small, doable ways. We listen to ourselves and respect our reactions and learn from them. Figure out what they mean. It's called self-awareness. We learn to be assertive as a first step. What is language that we are comfortable with? How do we start? Okay, setting down, we really, really, really take to heart, okay, solidly, that setting boundaries is not selfish. It's self-respect. You say yes to yourself. When you set boundaries and limits, you say yes to yourself. You don't second guess yourself, all right? Each time you say no, when your boundaries and limits are being infringed upon, that builds confidence, it builds self-respect, and it builds self-esteem. It often takes encouragement. It does, to make yourself a priority and to persist. That's true. And especially when you receive criticism or pushback. Don't be put off by it. You might listen. You might ask, is there any part of that that resonates with me that I believe feels true? Not because I want to please, not because I want the conflict to go away. It's not a conflict resolution strategy just to make the conflict go away, because so many people are so uncomfortable with conflict. Do you know you can't have a healthy relationship? Conflict doesn't mean you're yelling at one another. Okay, that's abuse. When you're yelling at one another, that's not communication. All right? Conflict means we don't agree. We may never agree. We still like each other. We'll find a way, find the common ground, and we just won't press each other's buttons. Who are your supporters? Who are they? Don't say nobody. All right? Because sometimes when it feels like you don't have any supporters, you always have yourself. Do you remember that chapter in Conquer the Clutter? Strategies to identify, manage, and overcome hoarding? Remember I told you about a time when I was having a very hard time thinking. I had all kinds of support. I just was so like this at that time in my life. What did I do? I went and looked in the mirror and talked to myself. You always have yourself. Even when you're 100% wrong. In the wrong. All right? Love yourself, forgive yourself, and try again. Correct yourself and try again. Because boundaries and limits are learned. If you didn't learn those as a little one, you're playing catch up. It's time. Better days ahead, smoother sailing ahead, believe me. When you can start setting reasonable boundaries and limits for yourself, start small. Any kind of abuse or supervision, like over supervision, violates personal boundaries. That includes teasing, practical jokes, making hostile or accusatory or disparaging comments, and then trying to pass it off as a joke. That's a biggie, okay? That's abuse. Are you aware that you actually have rights? When was the last time that you considered your right to have boundaries and limits and maintain them? Okay. Are you aware that you have the right to be addressed with courtesy and respect, even when you're 100% in the wrong? It's your worst day, you screwed up terribly. You are still deserving of respect from others. They may not like you. They may not agree with you. All right? They may not want to be around you at that point in time. But how they deal with you You're entitled to respect. You're worthy of respect. So give it to yourself as well. Okay? Can you think of 2 ways, this is your homework, that are acceptable to you to state your bottom line? 2, with respect to each of these different types of boundaries. Okay. This is a recap, okay? We'll finish on this. We're back to considering our needs. Why? They are the foundation blocks of our self-respect, self-esteem, and self-awareness. That's why. All right? Communicate what we need in the way of boundaries and limits clearly. Take a deep breath calmly, firmly. No apologizing, no justifying, no clarifying. Okay? And respectfully. All right? So what that means is we don't need to justify. We don't need to do a sales pitch on anyone about why we're right or why we need something or why we deserve it. The least said, the better. Our needs are relatively simple, and if we're having to speak too much in support of them, in justification of them, in explanation of them, we're displaying a different need that may not be conducive to our self-esteem. Okay, it could be codependence. So if you find that you ticked a number of those boxes regularly, we're not talking once in a while. Nobody's perfect, okay? But that's your main, yep, okay, tick, 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 tick. All right, I want you to look up information about codependence. We can be taught to be codependent. I want you, when you make the choice about how you're going to live your life, I want you to know there are other happier, healthier, successful ways than the way you were taught. Give yourself the right to some options before you just knee-jerk to what you've been doing. You can do it. I know you can do it. You've done harder things. Give yourself a chance for more happiness. Remember this, you are not responsible for the other person's reactions, no matter what they are, to the boundary that you're setting. But you are responsible for communicating your boundary in a respectful manner, even if that boundary upsets them. Okay? So we have some questions here. Leslie. Thank you, Leslie. Yep, you can find them on hoarding.ca on the website. I found it hard to distinguish how people are not responsible for their feelings, especially when the other person might be deliberately being mean, trying to hurt us, and how those feelings we get can make us want to issue consequences for things they said and did. Are the consequences tied to our feelings? Is that bad or good? So what I'm basically saying, what I'm basically saying is this person behaves in a certain way toward us, right? And you're right, sometimes people are mean, deliberately hurtful. They're really trying to put us off our game. I want you to think of it as those words being like a ball, tossing us a ball, okay? Their words are a ball that are coming at us. Right? Don't catch the ball. When you get that first twinge, go. Don't listen, because they're not telling you the truth. Not if you feel they're deliberately trying to be mean and hurtful and upset you. Right? Don't pick up the ball. to yourself internally. Just say, this is more about you than it is about me. Say that to yourself. Don't say it back. Don't engage. Don't engage. And as soon as you realize this, remember the rule of three? All right. By the third thing they say, well, the second thing, even at any point when it feels bad, you can say, you know, when we can be more constructive, let's talk about this in a better way. But this is not going to solve anything. And then leave. Get up and leave. Leave the committee meeting. Remember, you can leave it in your head, or you can physically get up and say, you know, this isn't going to accomplish anything. And they might yell, you're not listening, you never listen. Say, I listen when people are trying to make me understand something, not when they're trying to beat me up with words. You've got the right. I've enjoyed reading Melanie, yes, on codependency. Leslie, it's a really, really, I love Melody Beattie. She does a whole lot of work with 12-step. Codependence is not owned by the 12-step program or addiction or anything like that. Codependence is a way of training people, usually little ones. All right, what's good, what's bad, manners. One's manners are often, that's often the label about a lot of what you're taught. All right, your appropriate social manners and allowing yourself to have your boundaries invaded, any one of the types of boundaries invaded consistently, or not the other person not being receptive and saying, no, I don't really feel like I know you well enough to have that discussion. Or maybe when we know each other better, right? Maybe may never come. That's perfectly okay. You haven't made a promise. All right. Okay. What was the name of the assertiveness book? Hold on just a second, folks. I have it right here. It's Self-Assertion for Women. It's not just for women, but it's especially for women. The classic guide that has helped thousands of women take charge of their lives. It's by Pamela E. Butler. Okay, got that one? Good. All right. It's a good little book. I believe in its Self-Assertion for Women. Yeah, you're right. Thank you, Shoshana. I should have read a little. I should have read down a little further. I'm doing a lot of work on codependency, especially boundary. Yes, thank you. You are on a good road, Leslie. This will pay off. It's going to feel a little awkward in the beginning, but it will pay off. It is a daily work. Okay, it is. And sometimes when you're tired, it's okay to take a break. All right. Take a break does not mean let the nonsense happen. Right? Take a break just means today I'm just not going to react. I'm going to just store my energy. I'm just going to replenish myself. Do you have a book? Oh, thank you for asking, Silver. Guess what, folks? Oh, I have some good news. I forgot. I have some really good news. So we don't have an audio book for Conquer the Clutter right now, but I just bought the rights from Johns Hopkins to produce an audio book. So it'll be Conquer the Clutter. I will be reading it. And probably by sometime September, October, the audiobook is going to be in production, barring COVID resurfacing, virulently. And it will be on Amazon.com.ca and Spotify, and not Spotify, but there are some other platforms that our podcasts are going to be on Spotify. They're going to be on CBC Listens, we hope, these podcasts. But the audiobook will be readily available, okay? And I will announce it when it's up and running. I have a producer who's working with me, and I'm so excited. I'm so excited. I've had so much feedback from people who live with ADD or ADHD, some other comorbidities, or just people who, you know what, they're not visual learners as in reading, they're auditory. And I decided it was time, and I'm really, really excited about it. It's a particular privilege that I'm going to get to read the book for you. Do you, on Zoom, do you post these Zoom meetings? I've missed a lot. Yes, absolutely, Leslie. Jim is in the process right now of editing some. We have them all posted, and then we discovered as we started to re-watch them that sometimes somebody's name in a box or something else, or somebody's picture for some reason came up. They must have accidentally hit speakers or gallery view, and their identity was exposed. So we took them all down. Jim is editing them and he's putting them up. I think he's got 3 or 4 up right now. So you can start there. Do you post? Yeah, okay. Is there a place where I can listen to the others and maybe this one again? Absolutely, Francis, sorry, and David. Yes, absolutely. I try to take note. Taking note, you know what? Let it sink in. Let it sink in. When you're listening the first time, let it sink in. Just let it sink in. And find where in yourself it's resonating. Put key words down. Don't try to take notes. All right? Because within maybe a week or two, it's going to be back up. And once we get all the others edited and back online on www.hoarding.ca, this one will be there too. We will be putting them up like within a few days. All right. So I found hard to distinguish out people who are not. Okay. What was your quote about impulses, Francis and David? Act in haste, repent at leisure. Or let's say react in haste, repent at leisure, right? The odds of making a mistake that you will regret or doing something that you will regret exponentially increases, right? When you react, all right? This is not a game of cards, all right? This is life. It's okay, practice. Putting yourself on pause, giving yourself some mental clear space. This is not a big like meditation thing, all right? That takes a lot of time and energy. It's just a practice of really, is this a good idea? Is this not a good idea? Will I regret this tomorrow? Will I regret it when the credit card bill comes in? If it's about a thing. If it's about an action, if this is a positive thing, why am I having this precautionary feeling about it? Probably I should wait and think this through a bit. I live alone, so okay. And Alina, hello Alina. I just ordered your book, Elaine. I'm glad about the audiobook too. Oh, thank you, Alina. Alina comes to us from, is it Miami? Alina, welcome. Pick. Okay, I have to read this one privately, sorry. Yeah, that probably wouldn't be your best idea though, Pick. Okay. So not in detail, but when you're giving someone a message, all right, even if it's a message that you really, really believe they are due and they need, it's always wiser, I think, to be sure that they're open to the message. Okay, so the example here was that as we're talking in the podcast together, and I'm answering your questions, and you're learning things that you want to consider, or you're learning things about somebody else's behavior, it's tempting not to send them the information. All right. So what's the goal? Is the goal that they actually pick up the message and they consider integrating it? Or is it that this is you? Right? Because it could come across as a really annoying smack. And you want to let the information integrate, figure out how it applies to you uniquely, how you're going to assimilate that inside. What parts of your behavior or your thinking is that going to, first, baby steps, start to work on, okay? Shelve the message to the other person, and then increasingly, as you interact with them, you incorporate that information into how you react with them, how you behave, the limits, the boundaries, right? So you use that information, you be the teacher, because chances are, if you send it to them or you mail it to them and they receive it, I can guarantee you there is a high probability they are not going to be receptive to the message. All right? So you use it for your benefit to change the way you react and interact with them, and that will teach them. People always learn better experientially when they experience something, because you touch all of their senses when you do that. We have a few more questions. Oh, thank you so much, Peter. Peter's thanking me for the session and for the information about the audiobook. Okay. All right, I think we have all the questions answered. Everybody have a great week. We'll see you next week. And know too that I do a blog on Psychology Today with Sue Cronkite. And we try to stay specifically on issues around hoarding. I feel comfortable in our podcast extending the periphery, the behaviors, the skill set, what are the component parts to healthy living, and healthy living being not being subjected to temptation and triggering behaviors that result in hoarding. Okay, so I see the podcast as a broader picture with respect to hoarding behaviors or hoarding tendencies or impulses. Anyway, have a wonderful week. We'll see you next week. And thank you all for showing up. We had a bunch today. And if there are any topics that you are especially interested in, please send me an email, and I will see if there are any people that you particularly would like to hear from. Happy to invite them to be part of our podcast. So take care, everybody. Bye. See you next week.